Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome. Excited for this webinar today. I'm Chisina Kapungu. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Great to see all of you here today. I know for some it's really early and I appreciate it. We are excited to welcome you to this webinar discussion entitled Empowering Futures, Unleashing Potential with the Gender and Youth Analysis Toolkit. My name is Chisina Kapungu, and I serve as the Gender Community of Practice Co-Champion, and I am based in Washington, D.C. My fellow co-hosts, Candace and Samantha, can tell a little bit about themselves before we start.
Hi, everyone. I am Candace Chilwa. I'm based in Johannesburg, South Africa, and I am the Gender COP co-champion of youth and also a menstrual activist. And I'm really looking forward to today's insights. I'll hand over to Samantha now.
Thanks, Candace. Hi, everyone. Very excited to be here. My name is Samantha. I am a member of the YP2LE Youth Advisory Group. I am based in Madrid.
I'm trying to finish one.
Sorry, based in Madrid, but from Nairobi, Kenya.
Hey, wonderful. So we're going to be your co-facilitators for today. So in our agenda today, we're going to give you just an overview of the community of practice. Some people might not know what the Gender COP does, so we'll give you information about that. We'll provide you an overview of the Gender and Youth Analysis Toolkit, reflect on the GESI tool, which is by IREX, do some breakout rooms, and then tell you about some upcoming events that will be happening. So let me tell you a little bit about the Gender COP. So we aim to promote dialogue that is inclusive, contextually relevant, and localized. And we really want to have engaging, interactive, and insightful discussions which promote cross-cultural learning. And so we really try to tailor the webinars so that you have practical application and skill building and the space to share, connect, and learn. And so we're really trying to provide practical strategies which can improve gender intentional work. Now, if you want to join the COP, you can please register on www.youthpower.org to connect with the Gender COP or other COPs. And we also have discussion groups, and there's opportunities to find out about future events that Youth Power is holding. For the Gender COP, we also send information on Mondays called #Mindful Wishful Mondays. And every Monday around probably towards the end of the day in the US time, we post on events, job opportunities, grant opportunities, and future webinars. So if you go to youthpower.org, go to connect, and then Gender COP, you can be officially part of the Gender COP and get these newsletters and be part of the discussion group. With that, we are excited about our discussion today. I'd like to introduce our speakers. Michelle Stern is a gender and social inclusion consultant where she provides technical assistance to donors and implementing partners related to gender equality, women's empowerment, and PYD throughout the project cycle, including project design, training, development, and assessments. She has a background in qualitative and quantitative research and analysis, covering a broad range of topics related to economic growth, food security, and community development. And then we have Indiana Jimenez Guerrero. She is the Gender Equality and Social Inclusion Advisor for USAID's youth-led activity in the Dominican Republic. She's responsible for mainstreaming gender equality and social inclusion, protection, and intersectionality perspectives throughout the design, planning, and execution of the project's activities. And last but not least, we have Zaira Lanez Carrasco. She's a woman from Guatemala, passionate about feminism, politics, and research. She's the Gender Equality and Social Inclusion Officer for the USAID Youth Excel program. She's responsible for ensuring that the consideration of girls, young women, and marginalized groups are mainstreamed throughout program activities and fostering youth-led program planning through a variety of assessments, outreach to targeted groups, and adaptive methodologies. So we hope to have a substantive, engaging webinar with our speakers today. Please feel free to insert any reflections, experiences, comments, or questions in the chat. Now I'll pass it off to Michelle.
Great. Thank you. And hello, everybody. I'm so excited to be talking about this toolkit. So I hope you can all hear me. I'm getting notes that my internet is not entirely stable, but we'll see how this goes. So this toolkit was published in 2021 in the heart of the pandemic, and we never really had a chance to promote it adequately. So this is a great opportunity for you all to learn about it, and hopefully you will find it useful. So today I'm going to talk about why we created it, who the target audience is, and what you can find inside of it. So if we go to the next slide, this is how we got here. Youth Power 2 was, excuse me, asked by USAID to carry out an evidence gathering assignment using a literature review and key informant interviews to try to understand how to best improve young women's economic empowerment and employment. And I am pretty sure that we talked to a lot of the organizations that are on this call, and thank you 2 years later for helping us. We came up with a lot of really interesting information and recommendations for USAID. But one thing that really came to the top was that in startup analyses, young women's constraints and opportunities were not getting adequate attention. So we learned that if a project was just targeting young people, young men and young women, there wasn't often sufficient disaggregation in the startup analysis to get information. And when a project was more general and targeting people of all ages, youth were typically included in the startup analysis, but not to the extent necessary, again, to get enough information about young women's situations and to use that to design interventions and a monitoring and evaluation strategy. The other thing we heard from stakeholders is that they weren't familiar with tools and resources in order to carry out this type of analysis. And so USAID tasked us, based on our recommendation, to develop guidance and tools to create this toolkit. So that was phase 2 of this assignment. Okay, so next slide, please. Thanks. So the toolkit starts with a section which includes definitions of key gender and youth terminology and links to resources and a rationale for inclusion. I'm assuming that everyone on this call already understands the need for inclusion and doesn't really need persuading. And so I'm not going to go into that in detail, but this one quote really sums up the importance of including young women in the analysis. Basically, they all have different needs, interests, capacities, challenges compared to their older female counterparts or male counterparts. And analyses should provide information that will enable implementing partners to produce a very integrated gender equitable response to the challenges these young women face. Okay, next slide. So who should use the toolkit? We wanted to make sure that it's broadly applicable for different types of projects. Under the first bullet, this is for projects that are targeting young people, either just young women or male and female youth. And under the second bullet, it's youth inclusive economic growth programming. So this means beneficiaries of different ages that can include female youth or male and female youth. The toolkit was primarily designed for implementing partners, but I would also say that it's applicable for USAID missions when they're in the design process to maybe consider some of these issues and use some of the guidance included in the toolkit. I recently saw a solicitation for a new USAID youth project where within the entire solicitation, gender is not mentioned once. So really it's up to the IPs who are applying for this project to decide how inclusive to make it. And, you know, I think that you really can't succeed in a project like that without looking at the issues related to young men and young women. Okay, next slide, please. So here are the contents for the toolkit. It introduces different frameworks and demonstrates how they can be consolidated. We provide a checklist and descriptions and links to 25 tools. So we try to make it really easy to be more inclusive in the startup analysis. So I'm going to use the rest of my time to describe these different sections. Okay, so this is about selecting a framework for doing a gender sensitive analysis. So I'm just going to read a quick description of what a gender analysis entails. So gender and/or youth analyses provide assessments of the cultural, political, economic, and social environmental factors impacting women, youth, and marginalized groups, which could include people with disabilities, gender diverse individuals, people living with HIV, and other social groups relevant to whatever the project is targeting. And it can also be relevant to specific contexts or sectors. For example, let's say people working in the fisheries sector. When we get to the tools section, you'll see that some of them are designed specifically for youth, some are designed specifically for women, and some are more broad and include aspects of intersectionality. And I would say that all of them can be adapted to whatever population a project is targeting. So they're pretty broad. So when we were designing this toolkit, we looked at these 5 different frameworks, which I'm only really going to go into details in one of them. But within the toolkit itself, there are links and resources and descriptions. So if you want to learn more about any of them, just go to the toolkit and have a look. So we included positive youth development. We included USAID's ADS Direct 205. We have 2 market systems frameworks, one from USAID and one from CETA. And we include the WIA, the Women's Empowerment in Agricultural Index. So if we go to the next slide, there's some additional details about ADS 205. And the reason we're providing the additional details for this one framework is because typically when you're doing a USAID gender analysis, they require you to integrate this framework and maybe format your analysis according to the domains. So I'm just going to describe these briefly for those of you who are not familiar with these. The first one is related to formal statutory laws and customary legal systems. The second one is about perceptions of gender identity, which are supported by and embedded in policies and practices. And really, you need to understand how these impact the behaviors of project participants in order to design relevant interventions. The third one is about gender roles, so understanding what men and women, boys, girls, and other stakeholders do in terms of market and non-market activities. The third one is about whether and how women and other groups might have equitable access to productive resources information. And the fifth one is about the ability of women and girls to decide, influence, and exercise control over material, intellectual, and human resources. And I haven't included it here, but you will sometimes see a 6th domain, which is personal safety and security, which is related to the different types of gender-based violence and how they impact the different stakeholders and how you can mitigate or respond to those issues. Okay, next slide. So we did 2 things, again, to try to make this easy for users to understand how to apply the different frameworks. So within the main part of the document itself, we provided a consolidated framework and showed how the different questions within each individual framework could be used. So for example, under the domain of enabling environment, which would be the first one about policies and regulations, you can see that under PYD, there's a question about organizations that make available opportunities for young women to express themselves. ADS 205 is specifically about laws, policies, and regulations that are relevant to community members to make decisions. Within market systems, we look at how service provision and enterprises can best serve young women. And the WIA enabling environment questions are around leadership positions. So we have a table with all the domains like this. And then also in Annex 2, we've created a full set of questions pulled from all the different frameworks. That is a really good starting point to do an analysis for youth, for young women, and hopefully you will find that useful. Okay, next slide. So we also included a checklist that users can refer to along the way as they're going through the analysis process, and includes these 4 categories: planning and preparation, selecting a framework and methodology, data collection and analysis, and then guiding questions. And again, this will be really useful for users who maybe aren't that familiar with this process to make sure that they're being fully inclusive. So on the next slide, you can again see an example from one of the categories. This is the data collection and analysis category. So all of the 4 categories are modeled like this. There's several questions, checking in to make sure the team has followed best practices. And then there's a few tips. For example, in this case, it was about considering sensitivity to cultural norms and ensuring full disaggregation in data collection, which, as I said, and typically what we've seen in some of the youth analyses is that they're not fully disaggregated by age or sex or other intersecting identities. Okay, perfect. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the tools that we found. We were not tasked with creating any original content in this instance. So what we did was we did desk research. We reached out to the implementing partners who we had spoken to in phase 1, and we reached out to some other donors to see what they had. And we came up with a list of 25, I think, really excellent and very different tools that can be applied very broadly. And I will say that some of these, there's no silver bullet. So some of these you'll find maybe, hopefully, are ready to go to meet your needs. Some of them may have to be tweaked a little bit for different audiences or different sectors. Maybe you'll find that it's useful to use parts from different tools. I will also say that it's been a couple of years since we did this. And so there's probably some new tools out there. And in fact, the tool that we're talking about today is a continuation of one that was included in the original list. So they've further developed it, which is fabulous. And I think somebody was going to ask you later, but I'm going to ask now as well, that if any of you know of any new tools that have been created, please either share it in the chat or share it by email with someone in the COP.
What is it?
Yeah. Okay, so we presented the tools in 2 ways, again, to try to make it as easy to access as possible for users. So the first way is it a list, which includes a link, the objective, and how to apply the tool. And then in Annex 1, there's a table with slightly more information, and it's also sort of easier to look at because it's all in one place. So on the next slide, we're going to give you an example of what that looks like, and also how these tools really differ from each other. So some of you may be familiar with some of these tools already, but the first one is UNICEF's Gender Toolkit. And the focus is very general. It's about gender mainstreaming. And it includes a really excellent checklist. It's targeted specifically to women and girls with a few questions about men and boys. And again, I would say it's, as I said in the 4th column, it's applicable to different sectors, different topics, and can be adapted to whatever project you may be doing. The second toolkit is specific to the agriculture sector. And I really try to encourage my clients who work in the ag sector to use this, because I think it's really an excellent way of really identifying the needs of young women and young men in agricultural development projects. It applies a PYD lens and approach. This one is a standalone tool, so it's only looks at youth analysis. I didn't mention this in the previous slide, but some of the tools are more broad than just the analysis phase of a project. They also look at project implementation and then monitoring and evaluation, and offer illustrative indicators that can also perhaps be useful to all of you, even though it's not the focus of this toolkit originally. And then the third example is specific to adult education. And it includes case studies, background information, and also checklists that you can use throughout analysis. And this one covers more broadly gender, different age groups, and different intersectionalities. So I really hope that there's something in here for all of you at any time. If you have any questions for me, please include them in the chat and I would be happy to answer them. And I will turn it back over to Chisina.
Thank you, Michelle. So thank you so much for developing and showcasing this toolkit. We think this can be useful for our members and program implementers so they can understand the cultural norms and beliefs, gender roles, assets and resources, and risks in their communities. And I love it that you have it across specific sectors. So we want to encourage members to use it, and also to give feedback as well, because we always want to refine some of the tools that we develop. So now we'd like to feature one of the tools from IREX. So we have Zaira in Indiana, who will discuss the Global Gender and Equality and Social Inclusion Analysis used by Youth Excel. I'll hand it over to Zaira in Indiana.
Thank you so much, Chisina. Hello, everyone. Good morning from the lovely and active Guatemala in Central America. I'm very happy to be here with my colleague Indiana, who is in the Dominican Republic in the beautiful Caribbean. We are very excited to share some of our experiences and learnings from implementing gender analysis in IREX, and also learn from all of you. So today, as Chisina was saying, we will present the Youth Excel Intersectional Rapid Gender and Protection Analysis tool, to which I will refer as IRGPA. So by the end of this session, you will be able to understand the Youth Excel program, to understand how the Youth Excel program designed the IRGPA, which basically is our version of what we traditionally know as a gender analysis. You will also be able to understand how it has been used and what we have learned from it in specifically two USAID funded programs, one Youth Excel, which is a global program, and the youth-led activity based in the Dominican Republic, which will be explained by Indiana. And after our presentation, we're going to have the possibility to practice with the IRGPA framework to see how you can use it in your own programs. In the next slide, we are going to see very quickly the agenda. First, I'm going to briefly explain how we designed the IRGPA. Then I'll explain what it is, and we will share some examples. Finally, we will go to breakout rooms to work and learn together. So I am going to start by introducing Youth Excel. It is a 5-year program, cross-sectoral youth development activity. It has supported nearly 80 local organizations in 19 countries to carry out implementation research and use data for real-time decision-making to strengthen their programs. During almost 3 years of implementation, Youth Excel has developed more than 30 IRGPAs. And you can read more about Youth Excel in the link that will be provided in the chat. Okay, so let's go to the next slide to see what is the IRGPA. As I mentioned before, it is our version of what we traditionally know as a gender analysis, but this is led by local youth from different backgrounds, focused on JESI and protection issues that may affect a youth program in their community. It is intersectional because we want to be very intentional about collecting disaggregated data to reflect different experiences, especially about the most marginalized groups. It is rapid because we intended to develop this JESI analysis at the beginning of all of the activities that Youth Excel does globally to understand power dynamics in each context. And another interesting thing about this gender analysis is that this includes protection. So it integrates tools like risk analysis. This tool has guidance and template for youth-led organizations and youth researchers to develop these gender analysis. Okay, in the next slide, we're going to show how we designed the IRGPA. So the Youth Excel program started with a global JESI analysis, which combined the ABS 205 framework, which Michelle presented before, and also the Positive Youth Development Framework. We will see this framework later. Then, with our consortium partners, ABAD and Search for Common Ground, who brought to the consortium their expertise around gender and protection, we started creating the JESI and protection approach and tools. So that's how we came with and created this guidance and template for youth, which resulted in the IRGPA. So now, after 2 years of conducting IRGPAs in different activities and contexts, we are finalizing this tool, which integrates all the feedback that we have received from different youth and organizations and lessons learned, like integrating the action plan. So this IRGPA goes directly to actions, and we can see the findings applied to the programs that are being developed in each of these communities. And this tool will be available to the public very soon. Now, in the next slide, you can see the framework of the global JESI analysis that I mentioned before, and you can take a closer view of this framework using the link that will be shared in the chat. In the next slide, you can see the 5 areas of inquiry of the IRGPA. And you are for sure familiar with these. So these are enabling environment, gender roles, responsibilities and time use, assets and resources, and protection and risks. And we will have more time to read about each of these 5 areas in the breakout rooms. And now I will show some examples of how the IRGPA has been used in different activities and contexts in Youth Excel through some key findings and quotes from the young researchers who have led these research processes focused on JESI and protection in their own communities. So in the next slide, we can find the first example from Guatemala. this was one of the first activities of Youth Excel that used the IRGPA. So this activity was focused on the economic empowerment of Indigenous women and prevention of gender-based violence. We started with the recruitment of 4 local diverse youth with some research experience. We provided the trainings on the IRGPA, and then they led and conducted the research process, and they produced knowledge products like a policy brief and media cards, which you will see in the next slide. And you can also find in the Youth Excel Facebook webpage. These researchers, they presented the IRGPA to the implementing partner, to participants and the stakeholders of the Youth Excel activity, so everyone could be aware of the power dynamics of the locality. And the idea is that these data would also inform the design and implementation of the activities to ensure an inclusive and safe program. In the next slide, we can see an example of some of the main findings for this community named Quetzaltenango in Guatemala. And one of those is that there are not enough public policies, projects, or specific programs that respond to the needs of women, youth, LGBTQI+ people, and people with disabilities, which limits their full involvement in the society. In the next slide, we can see some quotes from these researchers that shows how useful they found the intersectional approach, for example, to understand different identities and elements of their local context. It also shows the added value of having youth at the forefront of a gender analysis that provides this layer of information that can only come from the local youth themselves, because it speaks in their own voice, speaking to their own experience. In the next slide, we show some of the findings from another Youth Excel activity in Kenya. And this IRGPA highlights a new increase in child early and forced marriage and female genital mutilation and cutting, among other findings. In the next slide, we can see how young researchers who led this IRGPA referred to the experience as a research process where the young people are making all the decisions at all the stages of the research activities and are able to influence youth programming in their communities by leading these gender analysis. So this also brought us to different reflections about how we can shift power when we are designing and implementing our different programs. In the next slide, you can see some of the main findings from a different Youth Excel activity in Cameroon, which was focused on menstrual hygiene. Some of these findings highlight that menstruation is seen as a taboo, as an issue that deals only with women. Also, how poverty makes it difficult to pay for assets, services, and resources. And especially, it highlights the experience of internally displaced adolescent girls, how difficult they find to respond to menstrual problems due to lack of resources. And finally, I will share with you the experience of one of our partners in El Salvador. This was a university. So they didn't know anything about gender analysis. So at the beginning, they thought that they didn't need it. they didn't felt the need of having a gender analysis, and they also doubt about having youth as researchers. But in the end, at the end of the experience, the authorities were impressed with the analysis and all the information it provided about gender, inclusion, and protection that could be used for the university. And they realized that they needed these type of analysis in more areas of the university, and they even came with a protection policy after these. And in the next slide, we can see how they found and they highlighted that this information is usually not accessible to most of the youth. And this experience helped them to this experience and analysis helped them to identify gaps and risks to advance gender equality, inclusion, and protection of the target population of the project that the university was about to implement with Youth Excel. So now I am going to pass the floor to my colleague, Indiana, who will share another interesting example.
Thank you, Zaira. It's great to be here with all of you. I will tell you the example about the USAID-led activity we are having in the Dominican Republic. It's called Youth Leaders Transforming Their Communities. It's a youth-led activity, and it's called, well, we call it DRYLA. And the main, it focuses on increasing protective factors of the community at the community level to reduce risks that lead to juvenile delinquency and violence. Youth are at the center of the intervention, leading social implementation committees, coordinating support networks, and generating opportunities in the community. It is implemented by our partner Entrena, along with other local and international partners. IREX is providing advisory regarding GESI and protection for this project. This activity will also support the Dominican government in coordinating and strengthening youth programs, services, policies, and safe spaces to ensure a positive enabling environment. And it has a strong research component, ensuring that the decision-making is evidence-based. And this is where gender equality, social inclusion, and protection of youth and intersectionalities enters in this particular project. Sorry, I was taking the time. It enters the project because it will be central for the research and the planning of the activity. This activity centers also on the needs and realities of vulnerable groups aged 10 to 29 in specific communities, specific vulnerable communities, and targeting women and girls, LGBTQI community, people with disabilities, youth in conflict with the law, migrants, and Afro-descendants. In the next slide, we're showing you our IRGPA began in May with the recruitment of 16 youth leaders and as researchers. We had 10 women and 6 men. Most of them belonged to the research communities or were knowledgeable about the issues analyzed, such as sexual and reproductive rights, masculinities, disabilities, justice, and health sciences. They also were diverse in terms of sexual orientation, social class, ethnicity, and areas of works. This diversity of identities, backgrounds, and previous knowledge was paramount to the design of the IRGPA in the Dominican Republic. For example, out of the 9 focus groups they held, 1 was carried out in Haitian Creole with Haitian migrant youth and Dominican youth of Haitian origins. This was possible because one of the researchers, despite not being directly from the vicinity research, belonged to the Dominican Haitian community and knew Creole. And this also allowed easier access to the community because it made them feel safe to gather and share their experiences, especially in a very difficult context for migrants that were living in the country. So these researchers, in a span of 2.5 months maybe, went through 100 documents, including government data, UN country reports, law, policies, and reports from NGOs specializing in youth, gender, disability, women and children, migrants, and Dominicans of Haitian origin. And they interviewed 11 stakeholders in all of the communities, including school teachers and educators, neighborhood council members, members of local youth serving organization, and they reached 87 people in their focus groups. So in the next slide, we can see with that information they collected, these are the some of the preliminary findings we are getting for each area of inquiry. For example, in enabling environment, one of the findings is youth living in vulnerable communities experience abuse from law enforcement officers who enforce racial and physical appearance profiles to enact detentions. Young Haitian migrants and our Dominicans of Haitian origin and youth from the LGBTQI+ community are particularly targeted. This is a finding that repeats in all of the community. So we're marking it as a tendency in that particular area of inquiry. In gender roles, we found that there is precarious access to jobs and that guarantee a decent standard of living for youth and gender inequality in the labor market. Women tend to be underrepresented in the formal labor market and face a significant wage gap compared to men. This gender inequality extends to young people from the LGBTQI+ community who also suffer gender-based discrimination for their sexual orientations, gender identities, and/or expressions. In contribution and agency, we found that there is limited access to decision-making spaces for young people, especially vulnerable groups, women, LGBTQI community, people with disability, Afro-descendants. So we will see this tendency repeat. There is an overall lack of access for youth, and then we will have youth that are even more underrepresented in decision-making spaces. In capacities, assets, and resources, we found that discrimination in access to land and housing. There is discrimination in access to land and housing for women and migrants. Here we have a quote from one of the focus groups. A woman said that sometimes you go to buy land and the first thing they ask you is if you have a husband. And if the answer is no, they say, well, I doubt very much that a woman alone can build on this lot. So these are evidently discriminatory practices based on gender stereotypes. And in protection and risks, we found there is insecurity in public spaces in general. There is a lack of security in recreational spaces and parks, and this increases the vulnerability for young people to different risks, including access to illicit substances and human trafficking. You will see that these findings are all interconnected in one way or the other. For example, gender discrimination and stereotypes in labor affecting young women and LGBTQI community and people with disabilities also will hinder those groups' access to decision-making spaces, as basic as holding positions in the neighborhood councils. And that this also, the labor discrimination they suffer, it also impacts on their capacity to access assets and resources such as land. And that the lack of safe recreational spaces is both a protection and risk issue, and it also belongs in the enabling environment area of inquiry. Each finding will go revealing a structural problem that affects youth in their diversity in a differentiated way. And of course, in the analysis per se, in the report, that's something we can go into more detail and analysis. In the next slide, we're going to see some quotes from our youth researchers about the experience of doing the IRGPA. Here is one that said, we thought there was not a problem in the community regarding migration because we didn't find anything about it in our bibliographic research. But when we talked with the youth in the focus groups, they mentioned migration being a great issue due to the race by the migration authorities to report irregular Haitian migrants. The other issues were they identify, the other issues we identified were true, but also this one we didn't expect to find. This is a young researcher from Santo Domingo Oeste, which is the greater Santo Domingo area. We gathered a lot of shocking information. People were very open. They pointed out how they felt very good with the focus group, that for them it was more like a friendly visit because no one ever goes to ask them how they feel, nor give them the opportunity to express themselves. This is a youth researcher from that assisted in the focus group with Haitian migrants and Dominicans of Haitian origin in Creole. And I have exercised a skill that I had not discovered researching. I have realized that no one tells the story better than the person who lives it. So this warms me up a lot because it shows the impact this kind of experiences can have on youth, also on mounting stereotypes and biases they could have themselves. In the next slide, we can see some of the lessons learned in this IRGPA process. And we divided them, what we found in the gender analysis per se, and then in the youth research process. It was very hard to find disaggregated data at the community level. We found data at the regional level and general country level, but it was very hard to find data on the municipalities, and it was even more hard to find disaggregated data. Most of this very specific data was obtained through the primary sources review during the fieldwork. The LGBTQI+ and GESI are hard topics to address in different contexts due to taboo and discrimination. And that contextualization is important as researchers could contextualize better their instruments, their collection instruments, because they knew the local reality and they were able to devise strategies to interview and recruit participants better. This framework, the IRGPA framework, makes protection very practical. Researchers had to look into protection strategies for the focus groups, participants, and for the interview and for their own safety. So that was a very interesting lesson learned for us. And the IRGPA tool makes women, girls, and non-gender conforming persons' experiences visible in many male-dominated contexts, such as the prevention of juvenile delinquency and citizen security. Regarding the youth-led process itself, it shifts power about who can do research and what kind of research is valuable. And another lesson was the time constraints. Is one of the main challenges. And of course, we encounter it itself. It's different planning when you're not yet on the ground, and then when you are on the ground, you have to go adjusting. So yes, there's something to learn from that. The process is as important as the product. The process to onboard youth and provide them with tools, allowing them to develop their tools that also require some time is so important as the product itself they will produce. Research skills building is important and needed. And this also takes time and resources. Like we want youth to be able to research, but we have also to invest time and resources in giving them the skills, providing them with the skills and the tools for them to do it. And of course, there are a lot of administrative challenges that must be thought of before embarking in a process like this, because they can make the process slower. So that's also something we learn. Now we're going to practice. So we want to do an exercise so you can go home with a practical idea of how the IRGPA works. We will divide into 5 breakout rooms. Each group will be assigned one of the 5 areas of inquiry of the IRGPA and will work with a case study that we have in a handout. The idea is that we will then generate up to 3 programming questions or research questions, using always the intersectionality lens. We will do this in a Jamboard, and then we will come back and share in the plenary. I think we have 15 minutes if Chisina can confirm. I don't know how much I went over.
Yes, we have 15 minutes. Just wanted to find out though, before we get into the breakout rooms, whether I know Wanja had some questions. So if we can take questions before we actually get into the breakout room.
Perfect.
Wanja, thank you for your patience. You can say your question. Appreciate your patience.
Well, this is awkward. I think I raised my hand by accident. So just allow me to say hello to everyone and say you're doing a great job and happy to be here.
Okay, great. I'm glad that we weren't waiting too long then. Does anyone have any questions about the presentations that Zaira or Indiana? Okay, then if that's the case, let's go into the breakout rooms. Back to you, Indiana and Zaira.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to the breakout rooms. There you will have a handout, which I think, let me see, you also shared it here. Well, in the breakout rooms, you have in the Jamboard, sorry, you will have the instructions and the case study. So the case study is based in the lovely Dominican Republic. So you get a feeling of this in the Caribbean. The case study is Computer Cafe works towards providing equitable access to technology in a mountainous and rural area of the Dominican Republic. They decide that to strengthen their PYD programming, they want to do an IRDPA to understand how gender, age, and other identities impact equitable access to technology in their community. They meet with their small team to discuss the GESI challenges in their community and what questions they need to answer to strengthen the programming. So the identified challenge is equitable access to technology in their community in a mountainous and rural area of the Dominican Republic. So we will now develop, we will think in our groups in 3 questions regarding each of the area of inquiry we have. So let's go to the breakout rooms.
Yes, thank you everyone for the engaging breakout rooms. So now we'll open it up for the plenary. Zara and Indiana.
Yeah, so let's go with the order. So, and I think we can also share, if we can share the Jamboard screen to see the questions that were generated in the breakout rooms. So who would like to start from group number 1, enabling environment?
That would be me. We didn't write anything on the Jamboard, sorry. We failed at our task, but I'm just going to read my notes for you.
Oh, Michelle, I put the questions in there.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. I said I was while you're doing it, but go ahead. You can still do it.
Okay, let's see if I ended up with the same ones. We started out talking about national laws and policies and if there is budget and capacity to implement it, although we did discuss how it often takes a long time for what happens at the national level to trickle down to the rural level. And really, we hope that USAID will sort of work on that, perhaps with a higher level policy project that might impact this particular activity. And then we talked about at the local level, what support systems or services currently exist to help women, men, girls, and boys address access to technology. And when we were talking about support systems, we talked about family, we talked about public sector and private sector systems, like, for example, TVET in the public sector. And then we talked about what technology is currently used in the community, who uses them, and what are the best channels to access information. So this is trying to understand the infrastructure and network systems that exist within the enabling environment, and how young men and young women, for example, might use them differently, including, looking at safety issues, mobility issues, and all that sort of stuff. And then the fourth question is, what are the literacy levels within the community, and who has high and lower digital literacy levels? And yeah, that I guess is sort of related to educational policy, if we're trying to keep it in the enabling environment context. We could have kept going, that's how far we got, but I think it's a pretty good start. Thanks.
Yeah, my group focused on gender roles, responsibilities, and time use. And we were not able to get through all 3 research questions, but we were able to narrow down to 2. And so we had a general discussion about gender norms and how that plays out in our different cultural contexts. So we had an example from Ricky, who's also from Kenya, and we're able to share parallels on our experiences. And we also had Len from Philippines share her experience. And the first question we explored was, how young women in rural areas do not have access to technological training. Yes, technological training or training on digital skills. And so Ricky kind of talked about his experience on how we can mitigate these technological barriers through digital skills training that is targeted at disenfranchised groups. And Len also kind of asked the fundamental question of, who goes to school? And so this brought about a discussion around how the division of labor and responsibilities affect the time that is available for different genders to engage with technology, and how can we readapt our programs to ensure equitable access, particularly with the division of time and of labor and responsibilities that is very gendered. And lastly, we also explored the impact of COVID-19 and to what extent the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated traditional gender roles and expectations, and how this has influenced differential access to technology. So this is what we were able to get through.
So yeah, the agency and contribution did not necessarily have a lot of people. So I'm not entirely sure if I should just perhaps come up with specific questions or if we should just move to the next group. I'm not entirely sure what you'd want me to do, Zaira, for this one.
Why don't we move to the next group just in the interest of time? Wonderful.
Great. Thanks, Justin.
Yes, thank you. So we're in asset and resources. I don't know if Natasha or Lisel would want to read our questions. If not, I can go ahead and read them. Okay.
You can go ahead, Indiana.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we made different. I mean, one of the questions we had was about first the age gap. Like some generations handle technology easier, and other generations need more time and training. So we would like to know what is the age constitution of the community, and also the women will usually have less time and mental space to engage in technology training because they assume housework. So we would also like to know what is the gender constitution of the community. And then what are the available sources and networks in the community and who has access to them? And there we would like to see a disaggregation of gender and age. And also we would like to see what is the literacy rate in the community, and also have it disaggregated with gender and age. And I'm thinking, I think maybe in enabling environment, this was also mentioned. And finally, how cultural norms are affecting and traditions can affect the access to technological resources, and whether the community is actually interested in having access to technology, what will they use it for? Because this can give us ideas of tools, resources to provide, and diverse content, so people are accessing what they're actually interested in. So thank you, and if we can go to the next group.
All right, so I was a part of this group, so I'll just share from our group in terms of what was being said. I think in terms of protection and risks, we were having a conversation around gender-based violence, in particular online GBV, and how that sort of is not necessarily mitigated as much, in as much as there are platforms that exist to report. It's very difficult to sort of measure and track online GBV and how that takes place from a data perspective, because GBV is often always portrayed as a physical attack. And so I think, yeah, protection and risks in our conversation needs to have a bit of a more inclusive definition in terms of what exactly we need to be protected from, especially when it comes to technology. So these were essentially the two questions that we came up with. What are the potential risks for women, men, and youth in accessing technology? Because I think technology is always portrayed as this beneficial thing that will give you advantage, will help you a lot, but we don't actually put protections and mitigate against the downfalls and the disadvantages around that. Yeah, I don't know if I might have missed anything else. I know we did have some conversations in the chat that we were still expanding on, but because of time, we just basically put up these two notes. Zaire, if I did miss anything, please feel free to add on, but I'm happy to move on to the next group.
Oh, this is the final group. I just would like to share another question as an example. What kind of risks do our team and participants face in our programming and operations? So just adding that, over to you, Indiana, to close this space.
Thank you. I'm just, well, the idea of having, this is the same exercise youth did when they were working in the design of the RGP. They divided into groups, and they were thinking, having some information of the communities, we're thinking what we need to know to go out and find that information, to what we need to look for. So the idea is, once you have this internal discussion or in this reflection, you will have at least one research question per area of inquiry, and that will help you lead the overall research process. And of course, you will see questions can be intertwined, like you will find I mean, it's because of course the analysis is intersectional. So, and one social component can affect many different accesses to rights and resources. So you will, at the end, it's like a puzzle, and you have like the findings give you an idea that you have the pieces of the puzzle that give you an idea, a general idea, but also a more detailed idea of what, a general idea of what the community needs, and a detailed idea of what specific communities and vulnerable groups need. And that helps you plan, that helps you build that helps you build your planning and design for the implementation of the project or the activity or the program. So I hope this has been has given you a glimpse of what it is. We're hoping to have the second version of the IRGPA tool that we have been working on in these last 2 years, finished soon, and we will hope to share it with you too. And I think Lisa was asking if we had this resource in Spanish. The IRGPA is in English and in Spanish, so that is a good thing, that we can have it in both languages, so we can adapt also in our communities. We would like to thank all of you for coming and sharing this little bit with all of us.
Thank you so much, Indiana and Zaira, for walking us through the IRGPA. It really was great to just have those concrete examples of its use, and we hope that people will use it once it's launched out. Before we end, we'll pass it on to Samantha to talk about future events.
Thank you, Chisana, and thank you, Zaira and Indiana. Before we conclude, just want to go over a few of our upcoming events and reminders from the Youth Power 2 Learning Network. We have the Youth Wellbeing Prize Competition. And so if you know anyone aged between 10 and 29 who is interested in digital tools and how they can enhance well-being, please encourage them to apply. We also have the Business Entrepreneurship and Private Sector Engagement COP and Higher Education Engagement Transformation COP, hosting a coffee chat on entrepreneurship development in universities in Africa. So please register. And for newcomers who are interested in joining other COP events or the gender COP events, please join using the link that was sent by Candace in the chat. Lastly, I would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to our speakers, Michelle, Saida, Indiana, for their brilliant insights, and a sincere thank you to everyone who joined us. Your active engagement and thoughtful questions have made this webinar truly engaging and a success. So thank you so much.